This video is brought to you by the Cornwall Lebanon School District Technology Services Department. In this video, we're going to teach you how to promote a culture of digital citizenship so that you can teach your students to learn and thrive in the digital age. To start this thing off, we just want to explain what digital citizenship is. And ultimately, digital citizenship is the promotion of critical thinking to empower students to be responsible and safe while using technology. There are a bunch of different components, but in this video we're going to touch on these 7 items, starting with digital identity. Digital identity is the ability to build and manage a healthy, congruent identity online and offline with integrity. So we want students to show how their online and offline personas may be different. Studies show that people tend to show extreme versions of themselves online. So that could mean that they show a more adventurous side online, where in real life they might be a little more reserved. And this could have impacts on students because maybe what they show online is what they wish their personality was more like. And sometimes these gaps make us feel a little bit inadequate in our daily lives. And then it also is kind of a twofold method. So basically, we're actually impacted by what we see on social media as well. Typically, things that we see impact us because the things that are shown are usually very positive and exciting things. So when we scroll through our social media, we might find that there's some disconnect where we're seeing all of our friends and family and different people doing all these cool and exciting things, and really we look at what we've been actually doing ourselves, and we don't feel that anything that we've been doing is as exciting. So it can actually create those gaps just within ourselves, and then also can impact us when we see other people's things online as well. So just some conversations to possibly have with students. It's just to think about how they would describe themselves in their physical entity. So with their physical being, offline, just how they think of themselves. And then have them think about if they would actually look at how they present themselves on social media or how they do things online. How would they describe themselves? Are there any differences? And if there are differences, why do they think that's the case? Ultimately, it's just getting the students to have a full understanding for how that identity kind of impacts them and may help them kind of gauge how they portray themselves in the future. Another key component of digital citizenship is the digital footprint. And this is just basically having students understand how their actions and information they share can impact them. Basically, digital information is all stored somewhere, and anybody can find almost any piece of information about you if they look hard enough or know where to look. So really, the things that students post now on social media, or if they comment on an article or anything, can come back to them. So we want them to start thinking twice before they post things, and just think about what information they share online. Some conversation starters to have with students about digital footprint are just to think about how they want themselves to be seen online. And this is where it kind of goes along with that online identity. We want the students to kind of promote the best part of themselves online, but then ultimately just have an understanding that this is how we are choosing to be perceived. But it doesn't necessarily completely define us. We all have our faults as well. We just also want them to think about what information that they would want others to be able to find about them just by doing an easy Google search. And how does basically all of this impact how they want to act online. Next, we have cyberbullying, and this is a really hot topic because we're finding that this is impacting tons of students, not just in our district, but all over the world. And this is really the focus on the ability to detect cyberbullying situations and handle them wisely. This is happening in any age group. It could happen to anybody, really. It doesn't necessarily just have to involve students, but it's more likely to be in your teen and preteen age. But it really can have permanent consequences if it's not addressed appropriately. We're seeing where it's leading to self-harm, harm of others, and suicides. So it can get really serious if it's not addressed. Our role as educators is really, first and most importantly, is to get to know the students. If you know your students well, you're going to be able to know the warning signs when something's not going right for the student, and it'll help you kind of talk to that student and get them to open up to you. And if you determine that there is potentially some sort of cyberbullying going on, please get others involved with it as well. This could be at the beginning stages, making sure that parents are aware. It could be working with administration and school resource officers. And in a lot of cases, when things get more serious, it'll actually involve law enforcement, because the actual bully themselves will get themselves into legal trouble with these things going on. And just, it's very important not to ignore what the students are describing to you. If you see warning signs, it's really important that you act on it, because you can hopefully help to stop it before it gets too serious. And then we also want to make sure that we don't tell the students that they may be overreacting. We're going to take any threat for cyberbullying seriously. And if it turns out that it ends up being something minor, then we'd rather be over-prepared for it rather than just let it kind of go and we kind of ignore what we're seeing. The next main component is screen time management. And this is the ability to manage one's screen time, multitasking, and one's engagement in online games and social media with self-control, the last part being most important. Studies show that people with online addictions can see changes in their brains that are comparable to both addiction to alcohol and cocaine. And heavy screen users can be in constant state of hyperarousal, meaning they might have a hard time following directions, paying attention, tolerating frustration, or controlling impulses. We're seeing this a lot with our students. We're seeing more and more that the students are having a hard time either getting away from specific websites on their school computers, or they're having a hard time keeping their phone away. And I'm sure you're seeing this in your classroom as well. Just some conversation starters to have with your students on this are just to start thinking about how much time they spend on their screen. Obviously, they're going to spend a decent amount of their day in school doing things online, but we're even more focused on what they're doing outside of classwork. Do they find themselves spending hours scrolling through social media? Are they playing hours of video games or doing other things online? And depending what device they use, their device could actually tell them that information. For example, if you pull out your phone will tell you, like, this is how much time per day you're spending on different things, whether it's social media or looking at news or different things like that. Other things that students should think about is basically if they're able to pull themselves away from that form of technology, and if they're able to focus while they're away from that technology. If they find that they're having trouble, then that might mean that they all have a little bit of a screen addiction, and they might want to have some plans to kind of work with that. And ultimately, we want them to think about how technology is impacting their ability to set and accomplish goals. And this really comes down to something as simple as if they're an athlete, or if they're a musician, or if they're part of drama or anything else. Typically, they're going to have to put a lot of time into practicing to get really good at whatever their goals are. And what we find with students is that sometimes they, instead of putting that practice time that they need to, they'll be addicted to playing video games, talking to their friends online and things like that. So it's really impacting their ability to set and achieve those goals. So this would just be something to have students think about, so that way they can get the most out of whatever they want to accomplish. The next component of digital citizenship is online safety. And this is the ability to protect one's data by creating strong passwords and understanding the risks and warning signs of cyber attacks. Ultimately, the cyber threats, I mean, there's tons of them out there, whether it's email phishing, people trying to break into your passwords, get in your accounts and find information about you, or full-on cyber attacks where they're trying to physically break into servers and things to pull information out. But although these threats exist, the biggest threat for a company or an organization is actually their employees. And this is because most of the time it just takes someone to click on a link that they're not supposed to, or share something that they're not supposed to let that threat in. All right. There were an estimated 75% of organizations in the world that faced some sort of phishing attack in the past year, and the vast majority of those attacks were successful. All right, so that's just an example showing that someone had to click the link in the email. Even though that threat was sent, somebody had to physically click on it in order for it to be successful. So in this graph here, this is showing cyber threats that exist in the world at a particular moment in time. In this particular picture, I took a screenshot at 11 a.m. So while eastern parts of the world had most of their day complete, on the western part of the world, we were just in the morning. So you can imagine how many cyber attacks are in one day. And over on the side here, you can kind of get an estimate for it. So as of 11 a.m., there were 19 million cyber attacks detected. And you can see kind of where those attacks were taking place at that particular moment in time. So this is just alarming because I don't think we understand in the world how prevalent cyber attacks are. There's a reason that this is one of the fastest growing fields and something that our government is really focusing on as we try to deal with threats from other countries. And just some things for you to think about and your students are just, are your passwords secure? How do you know if a link or a website is legitimate or not? How do you tell if the email is actually supposed to be saying what it's doing, or if it's some sort of phishing scheme? If students are sharing information online, they want to think about, are they talking to strangers? Who's able to see that information? And just other ways that they can keep themselves safe and not have to worry about extra information being shared with them. And next we have digital literacy and critical thinking. And this is the ability to distinguish between true and false, good and harmful content, and trustworthy and questionable content. This is something that's been increasingly more difficult to do because it's such a complex topic and there's so many factors. We have to understand there's bias in the media that we're seeing. There's studies and graphics that can show you in general how different media outlets are judged to be with their bias and their accuracy. So I highly suggest that you go and do some searching for that. It's pretty interesting just to see where your source of news kind of falls in line with what your different views are for different things. When we deal with information online, we also have to be aware of how artificial intelligence and bots and things are impacting us as well. Basically, when you're doing anything online, it's actually behind the scenes, these programs are actually calculating and finding content. So ultimately they want to sell you things through advertisements and things like that. But then there's also news aggregators and social media feeds that are feeding you things that they believe that you will also agree with. And their goal is to get you to click on that because that's how they're keeping your attention, that's how they're keeping you engaged, and that'll ultimately lead to more ad revenue. So what we have to be mindful of is the things that we read. The more we read topics, they're going to ultimately lead us to get skewed in one direction or another, whether that's political beliefs or whether that's beliefs regarding a certain event that happened. So we just have to be mindful that as we read more things online, there's ramifications because you're going to get fed more things that the computer believes that you're going to believe. And then what goes along with this is there are also bots that are spreading false information. So when you're looking at things, you might not even be reading articles and things that are created by, or headlines that are created by an actual person. There might be some sort of automated bot created by somebody just to kind of get everybody stirred up. Studies showed that about half of the things that were shared when COVID hit in March of 2020, and half of those things were created by bots, and it was just to kind of help create a little bit more hysteria with what's going on. So things that people were liking and sharing on social media were actually created by not an actual person before. And this is just something to be aware of, and it's not going to go away. There are things in place where companies are trying to prevent bots from overtaking and controlling the conversations, but at the end of the day, it's just something that we're going to have to be mindful of and help our students be aware of as well. Some things just for students to have conversations about are how they can determine fact from fiction. with all of the misinformation that can possibly get spread. They want to have ways that they can kind of go and verify with reputable sources and not just go off that thing that gets shared with them on Facebook or something else. Another thing they want to think about is how they can determine one's bias. There's different cues within the language, and there's all sorts of resources that we can pull from to help students with this as well, but how they can determine bias when things aren't just really clear as day as this is a true fact. And then something that really helps students get an overall understanding is just to think about what the opposing viewpoint would be. Why would a person choose to write this article or share this information? What would the opposing viewpoint to this be? And if they can kind of empathize and get an understanding from both sides of the argument, then that might be able to help them determine where the line's drawn for what's true, what's not quite true, what might be someone's opinion rather than an absolute fact. And then finally, the last component is copyright and creative credit. And this is the ability to give credit and respect the terms of usage by the original creator. This is important. A lot of times students are aware of what plagiarism is because that has academic implications where they may fail the assignment, have to redo it because they didn't turn in their own work. But there are actually potential legal complications as well if they're using other people's work outside of education. So it's great that if students are getting an understanding of copyright law and just how the public domain and fair use kind of play along with that. And then students really should have an understanding of what Creative Commons licenses are, since that's basically a modern way for people to just give people permission to use their works as long as they follow their terms. So these are great topics to cover with students, especially in any course that would involve students finding their own information to create a project or doing some sort of paper or something like that. And then ultimately, just to wrap this up, digital citizenship is important. It's more than just another thing that needs to get added on our plate because this has real world implications for the students. If they don't learn to manage how they act and interact with things online, they're going to be setting themselves up for a more difficult future, especially when they get out of school. So ultimately, we want you to think about digital citizenship to help students protect themselves, and we want you to be aware of things that are going on with all the online safety and cyber threats and things as well, just so that way you can protect yourself and model for students what good digital citizenship looks like. If you have any questions about this, or if you're looking for ideas for possible ways that you could implement digital citizenship into your classroom, please feel free to reach out to us. Our instructional technology team would love to help you do this. We believe that digital citizenship is basically applicable for any subject. It doesn't just have to be computer class. It could be anything. So when you have your students doing things online, it could just be as simple as a quick couple-minute conversation about something, or we could come up with ways to kind of indirectly tie a theme of digital citizenship into the lesson as well. All right, so please reach out to us, and we look forward to working with you soon.